Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, if there's anybody that should be apologising to the New Zealand public for the perilous state of our electricity system, it's Max Bradford and his ministerial colleagues that created the mess in the first place. And while I accept that the previous Labour government didn't adequately solve the problem that Max Bradford created, that doesn't mean that the Labour government was responsible for creating the mess in the first place. It's very hard to unscramble an egg, which was exactly what Max Bradford did, created a huge shambles, and we're still living with the impact of that today. And I think the people at home who are worried about their increasing power bills will be very disappointed to hear Craig Foss all but stand up in this House and say he doesn't care. The government doesn't care about increasing power prices. It accepts that this bill will not do anything to stop the massive increases in power prices that New Zealanders are seeing. And in fact, many of the proposals that have been put forward in this bill could actually increase power prices. Those were some of the submissions that were put before the Select Committee by many of the submitters, which was that this bill will not lower power prices, but it will actually increase power prices. We had some very considered submissions coming before the Select Committee, and they are submissions that the government chose to ignore. Mr Speaker, the Labour Party is opposed to this bill because we believe it fails to balance the priorities of a secure electricity supply, affordable and predictable pricing, and the sustainable production and use of electricity. Those are the three major points that we think the electricity system should be based upon. This bill does not do that. It does not do that at all. And in fact, Mr Speaker, we're very concerned that some of these proposals put forward by the national government have not been subject to the type of rigorous analysis that we should be able to expect from a piece of legislation that has a multi-million-dollar impact, because that's what this bill does. The asset swaps, we're not talking about toys here. We're not talking about minor things being switched around. Meridian have been allowed to play with the Waitaki for a little while, so now we'll give it to Genesis and let them have a play with it. These are multi-million-dollar assets we're talking about, and the least that the public of New Zealand can expect from their government, who are the trustee of these assets on their behalf, is that significant changes are adequately and robustly analysed to make sure that they're actually going to work. And we've seen very little impact, very little analysis of that by this government. The Treasury's own regulatory impact analysis team argued that many of these proposals haven't been properly thought out. They're lacking in certain areas, and they should, and I'm quoting directly from the Treasury, have included a more comprehensive discussion of the risks associated with the proposed option. And we're talking significant risks. Once again, restate the point, multi-million-dollar asset reorganisation we're talking about here, and Treasury have argued that the risks haven't been properly analysed. Treasury also argue, and again I quote, that they should provide a better idea of the magnitude of the costs and benefits of the options discussed in comparison to the problem they are trying to address. These are pretty basic fundamental issues that the government have not dealt with in putting these proposals before the House. Treasury argued that they should have better reflected the range of views received during the consultation, and the government's approach to the Select Committee process was to ignore the vast bulk of evidence that was put before the Select Committee. Treasury also argued that they should have contained a discussion of whether or not the options proposed have been tried overseas, and if so, what their impact was. Because electricity reform has been tried all around the world, and we actually have one of the worst records for power price increases in the last few decades, so why wouldn't we look around the world to see what else they have been doing? I'm very concerned, Mr Speaker, about the asset swap proposed. We had some very considered submissions at the Select Committee from organisations such as the Institute for Professional Engineers, who argued that the Waitaki water system operates best as a coherent whole, and that by removing Tekapo A and B, which is what this bill does, from Meridian, handing it over to Genesis, what we're actually doing is potentially creating a less efficient use of the water. We're creating competition on that water system where the players will be incentivised to maximise their own commercial benefit from the use of the water rather than make the best overall use of the water on the Waitaki system. That was put forward by the Institute of Professional Engineers, I think, in a very considered submission that was ignored by the government. We're very concerned about the impact that this is going to have. As Trust Power said in their submission, And again, I'm quoting from Trustpower's submission, the uncertainty created by the industry shake-up is likely to have a chilling effect on private electricity generators' willingness to invest in new electricity plant, raising the prospect of shortages again within a decade. That's from Trustpower, one of the bigger players in our electricity sector, saying that this will have a chilling effect on investment in new electricity plant, raising the prospect of shortages within a decade. Because the electricity sector has long lead times. What we're suffering from now, or what we were suffering from a few years ago with the electricity shortages, was the lack of foresight when those first electricity reforms were put forward in the late 1990s that created this market, disincentivised investment in new generation. We suffered the consequences of that throughout the late 2000s, before we reached 2010. The government haven't actually done anything to deal with that. We are reliant at the moment. Jerry Brownlee stands up in the House and trumpets the fact that we've done very well in the last year or two in terms of the renewable electricity that we've had. Two reasons for that. The first of which is it's rained quite a lot. And I don't think that Jerry Brownlee may like to claim credit for a lot of things. I don't think he can claim credit for the fact that it's rained quite a lot in the South Island in the last couple of years. So that has been a significant contributor to the proportion of renewable electricity generation that we've seen in New Zealand over the last couple of years. The other has been the significant emphasis the previous Labour government put on encouraging investment in renewable plant. So things like wind farms, which have been coming on stream and have increased our renewable energy percentage. That's a very good thing. Unfortunately, this bill does nothing to further those reforms, to further the drive towards renewable energy. Of course, that's not really surprising because the government's overall energy strategy is a total shambles. On the one hand, we've got Jerry Brownlee saying that the government's committed to 90% renewable electricity. Then we've got him going up and down the country talking about sexy coal. And I'm not sure how he manages to reconcile those two things together. But it just goes to show what a total shambles the government's energy policies really are. And I actually have to say the Leader of the House and the Minister of Energy obviously don't get on very well together, because what kind of Leader of the House would put up an energy bill for debate in Parliament today? The day that they back down on the mining, they put up an energy bill for debate in Parliament. The Minister of Energy and the Leader of the House may want to communicate a little bit more, because I would have thought that the government would be conscious about not wanting to debate a whole lot of energy issues in the House today, given the absolute dog's breakfast they have made out of the mining issue and the absolutely humiliating back down that John Key has had to do today after going out there and promising that the energy sector was going to be the major cornerstone of the government's step change in the economy. And yet today, here we have an electricity industry bill that is not going to lower power prices and that is not going to lead to a more sustainable supply of electricity. Same day, they're also backing down on their plans to mine in the national parks. It just goes to show what happens when the government blunders their way through putting forward these proposals in the energy sector without making sure they've got the evidence, the facts and the research all lined up beforehand. So the government's energy policies are a mess. Jerry Brownlee promised a New Zealand energy strategy within months of becoming the Minister of Energy. The government is more than halfway through its term and we are still waiting for a New Zealand energy strategy. The importance of the New Zealand energy strategy cannot be understated. People look to that, companies look to that for the important signals it sends about where they should be investing, what the government's overall vision for, where the incentives are going to lie, where the penalties are going to lie. Nothing from the government on that. The current energy strategy as it stands is the energy strategy put in place by the previous Labour government that Jerry Brownlee's going around the country telling everybody to ignore because the government don't support it. So the government's official energy strategy is in fact the energy strategy of the Labour Party, because Jerry Brownlee hasn't got around to putting in place another one. It's about time, a year and a half after becoming the government, that the National Party finally stumped up and put forward a coherent plan and a coherent vision for the energy sector in New Zealand. Finally, Mr Speaker, we will have a lot to say about the electricity industry bill as it progresses through the remaining stages in this House. We think it's very weak. We think that there are a lot of flaws in it that are going to need to be addressed in the committee stage of the House, and we'll have some further thoughts, further things to share with the House on that as we go through that debate. Mr Speaker, this is not a bill that's going to lower power prices for ordinary, everyday working New Zealanders. The government have given up on the task of trying to contain power price increases. Power price increases are going to keep going up under national